Trevor.
The latest news out of Iran is that the air defenses have been activated in several cities, including Isfahan, and that explosions have been heard in Isfahan. Who is bombing Iran right now?
Were those reports just as of a few minutes ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously I'll have to go back and check with the national security team. I'm standing out here with all of you, but I will do that, and we will get...
That right there is the White House press secretary at the podium being asked who is bombing a country they just declared victory over and having no answer. She's standing in front of the cameras mid-victory lap, and a reporter just told her there are explosions going off in Iran right now. And her response is, I'll have to go check. This was supposed to be a triumphant moment. The administration was an hour into telling America that Operation Epic Fury was a complete, total, historic success. Iran's navy destroyed, their missiles gone, their nuclear program buried, the supreme leader dead, and the ceasefire locked in. Except it wasn't. Because in the middle of the same press conference where they were declaring this generational victory, the world outside that briefing room was a different story entirely. And the reporters in that room started dragging the reality in, piece by piece. This is that story. Let's go back to the beginning of that briefing, because what started as a celebration turned into something very different by the end.
Over the course of the next week. Thank you for being here, Shane. Gabe.
Thank you, Caroline. Iranian state media is saying that Iran has now closed off the Strait of Hormuz today in response to Israeli attacks on Lebanon. What's the White House response to that? And you just listed many military successes. I understand that. But strategically, how is the administration arguing that Iran does not have more economic leverage than it did before the start of the war?
Sure. Well, with respect to the first reporting out of Iranian state media, the president was made aware of those reports before I came to the podium. That is completely unacceptable. And again, this is a case of what they're saying publicly is different privately. We have seen an uptick of traffic in the Strait today, and I will reiterate the president's expectation and demand that the Strait of Hormuz is reopened immediately, quickly and safely. That is his expectation. It has been relayed to him privately that is what's taking place, and these reports publicly are false.
Caroline, the president yesterday threatened that a whole civilization would die if a ceasefire deal wasn't reached, understanding that Iranian leaders have previously said death to America. But why is it appropriate for the president of the United States to use that kind of language when talking about civilian targets? And was the president mocking Islam by signing off his True Social post over the weekend, praise be to Allah? Wouldn't that antagonize Muslim allies across the world?
Well, I understand the questions about the president's rhetoric, but what the president cares most about is results. And in fact, his very tough rhetoric and his tough negotiating style is what has led to the result that you are all witnessing today. Iran publicly acknowledging last night that they have agreed or that they wanted this ceasefire with the United States because they no longer could tolerate being bombed by our very powerful and lethal military, and that they have committed to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which the president will hold them accountable for, and it's something the administration is closely monitoring in real time.
So,
Danny.
Should the world not take his word seriously?
The world should take his word very seriously in understanding that the president is always most interested in results. And it was the Iranians who backed down, not President Trump. He said that they would face very grave consequences, as you just laid out, by the 8 p.m. deadline if they did not agree to reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And what did they do last night? They agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Danny.
Thanks, Caroline. Would President Trump like to see Lebanon included in this peace deal? As you know, there have been increased Israeli strikes on Lebanon today with dozens of casualties there.
Sure. Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire. That has been relayed to all parties involved in the ceasefire. As you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu put out a statement last night in support of the ceasefire, in support of the United States' efforts, and he's also assured the president they'll continue to be a helpful partner throughout the course of the next 2 weeks.
Is there any thought, though, that the president might like to see Lebanon included at a future date, given that it seems to be causing or potentially...
Trevor.
The latest news out of Iran is that the air defenses have been activated in several cities, including Isfahan, and that explosions have been heard in Isfahan. Who is bombing Iran right now?
Were those reports just as of a few minutes ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously I'll have to go back and check with the national security team. I'm standing out here with all of you, but I will do that and we will get you an answer, okay?
And then just on the civilization question that we've been talking about.
And I would just add to that point, again, I haven't seen these reports. I'm not verifying them. Not that I don't trust you, Trevor, but I want to go back and check with the experts here at the White House. I would just say, and I would echo what the Vice President said this morning, this is a fragile truce. Ceasefires are fragile by nature. We've seen this with respect to the 12-day war with Iran and Israel last year. It takes time sometimes for these ceasefires to be fully effectuated. And one of the results of Operation Epic Fury was we completely dismantled Iran's command and control center, which makes it difficult for them to pass messages up and down the chain. And so we understand that. I would caution a little bit of patience, but of course we want to see the ceasefire effectuated and abided by all parties as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And the American presidential administrations, going back to Ronald Reagan, have said this formulation about nuclear war, that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Is that still the view of this administration, given the president's comments about civilization?
I have no change in our view on that policy. Katie.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm just, given the gravity of what he said yesterday, what was your understanding of what he meant when he said, this civilization is going to be eliminated?
I think it was a very, very strong threat from the President of the United States that led the Iranian regime to cave to their knees and ask for a ceasefire and agree to reopening the Strait of Hormuz. So it was a very strong threat that led to results. And as the Secretary of War stated at the Pentagon this morning, it was not an empty threat by any means. The Pentagon had a target list that they were ready to hit go on at 8 p.m. last night if the Iranian regime had not agreed to open the strait, which they did, and I think that's something we should all be grateful for.
The United States is a moral leader in the world, given that he
I was asked this exact same question by your colleague Andrew in the back, and I think, again, the insinuation by anyone in this room that Iran somehow has the moral high ground over the United
Two bombshells in the same briefing. First, the Strait of Hormuz, the very thing the president staked the ceasefire on, the red line he publicly issued an ultimatum over, reportedly closed. Before she even walked to the podium. And notice what she said, we have seen an uptick of traffic in the strait today. That is not the same as the strait being open. That is not the same as the ceasefire holding. That is a spokesperson choosing very careful words while the situation is actively unraveling. The ceasefire was announced the night before. It hadn't lasted 24 hours. And then, 20 minutes later in that same room, a reporter drops the next one. Explosions. Air defense sirens. Isfahan. Mid-briefing. Watch what happened. She didn't get a call. She didn't get a note passed to her. She found out from a journalist, and her answer, the official answer of the White House of the United States, was, I'll go check. They didn't know who was bombing Iran. Now, to be fair, the spokesperson wasn't lying when she said she hadn't seen those reports. She genuinely may not have. These briefings move fast. And she did give a somewhat measured response, noting ceasefires are fragile and that Iran's command and control had been disrupted, which is actually relevant context. But here is the larger problem. When you walk to that podium and declare the most sweeping, comprehensive military victory in a generation, when you say Iran's navy has been annihilated, their missiles destroyed, their nuclear program eliminated, their supreme leader killed, you are setting an expectation. You are telling the American people, this is over, we won, here's what happened. And then, in the next 45 minutes, reporters pull apart the story in real time. The Strait of Hormuz reportedly closed again. Explosions unaccounted for. Lebanon actively being bombed. The ceasefire described by the vice president himself as a fragile truce. That's not a victory speech. That's a situation still in motion. There was also the moment that stopped the room entirely. A reporter named Andrew asked a direct question. Trump threatened to destroy Iran's civilization. Not its government, its military, its regime, but its civilization. And he compared it to George W. Bush's message to the Iraqi people in 2003, where Bush explicitly said the war was against the government, not the people. Her answer? The president's rhetoric got results. And technically, she's not wrong that the ceasefire was announced. But threatening to destroy a civilization and then framing that as diplomacy is a line that American presidents have historically not crossed. The reporter's question wasn't partisan. It was historical. And it didn't get a historical answer. There's one more thing worth noting. When asked whether America still holds the position that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought, she said, quote, "I have no change in our view on that policy." Good. But the fact that a reporter had to ask is itself the story. Here is where things actually stand after this briefing. The administration is claiming that Operation Epic Fury achieved its military objectives. Based on the numbers they gave, over 13,000 targets struck, Iran's navy destroyed, its air force grounded, its missile stockpiles decimated. If those numbers are accurate, that is genuinely significant military action. The ceasefire was requested by Iran, which is also significant. But the victory being declared and the situation on the ground are not the same thing. The Strait of Hormuz closed again within hours of the ceasefire. Iran's nuclear enrichment not yet surrendered, still being negotiated. Explosions in Isfahan, cause unknown at the time of the briefing. Lebanon still being struck. And the president's chief negotiating team, including the vice president, is being dispatched to Islamabad this weekend because there is no deal yet. There is a ceasefire. There is a basis for talks. That is not the same as a deal. The administration has a habit, not unique to them, but particularly acute right now, of announcing the finish line while the race is still running. And what this briefing showed is that even the people at the podium can't always keep up with the pace of what's happening. 13 American service members died in this operation. That is not a footnote. That is the weight of what was decided, and it deserves a sober accounting, not just a victory announcement that starts fraying before the press conference ends. Watch this space. Because whatever this turns out to be, genuine peace or a pause before the next escalation, we'll know soon enough. If this breakdown was useful to you, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next update. We are going to be following this story very closely as the negotiations in Islamabad unfold. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this ceasefire holds, or is this a 72-hour pause before something bigger? I want to read every single one. See you in the next one.